Graham Kerr has been South32's CEO since October 2014. He led South32 through the demerger from BHP in 2015, its public listing in 3 countries, and has overseen the development and implementation of the company's strategy. There were critics in the early days, with some taking the view that South32 was built on unwanted assets. But Graham saw the potential of the company's portfolio, and under his leadership, South32 has undergone significant change to become a global, diversified producer of commodities that are critical to a low-carbon future. Graham is a passionate believer that when done right, mining has the potential to make a difference in people's lives. And that passion is reflected in South32's purpose: to make a difference by developing natural resources, improving people's lives now and for generations to come. We are trusted by our owners and partners to realize the potential of their resources. Throughout his time as CEO, Graham has strived to ingrain this purpose across all levels of the business. Graham was born and raised in Fremantle. Outside of business hours, he can be found enthusiastically supporting the Fremantle Dockers in their quest for an elusive first premiership. While some may think that Graham and the Dockers need a lot of luck in that quest, there are lots of other true believers who think it's only a matter of time. Graham previously joined us as a keynote speaker here in Melbourne in 2016 and in 2017 in London. So members and guests, please welcome Graham Kerr back to the Melbourne Mining Club.
Long walk. Good to see you, Graham. We've had a very interesting time, Graham and I, and his wonderful support team, and having a think about this opportunity that we have today, he has today, to talk with you about not only the transformation of South32, which has really been quite spectacular, a little bit about his own leadership journey, but also we've been asked to talk particularly about mining's role in decarbonisation and how South32 is meeting that challenge of meeting emissions targets and so forth. So I hope you very much enjoy the conversation. It's a fascinating story, this one, of this company, of the wonderful opportunities that sort of lie before the company right at the moment, as well as the challenges that they're very much leaning into overcoming around all manner of things to do with decarbonisation and just transition, as well as normal business operation. So we're going to have a chat, and then we'd love to hear your questions, and we'll have 2 microphones roving around. So I'll give you a bit of notice when that's coming up, but have a think about what you'd like to ask Graham. Great to be with you.
Thank you, Alan. Glad to be here. I
love that you are quite happy to embrace the title that was given to the new entity that you took on in 2015, which was Crapco. That was rather cruel of them. How crappy was it?
It's a good question. It's an interesting one because the first live interview I did was actually on ABC, and they actually started with shitco, crapco. How does it feel to be CEO of that? And I think you used the word earlier on in the piece about unloved assets. To me, you know, BHP I work for as a graduate, it's a great company, and they have some great, what you'd call tier 1 operations, such as their iron ore business or Escondina business. But, you know, within BHP there are lots of assets that had a lot of opportunity for development and future that weren't probably quite getting the love or the systems they needed. So to me, the demerger from BHP was a great opportunity for both companies to be better than what they were together. And I think if you look at the share prices of both companies since the time of the demerger, they're both dramatically improved. I think importantly, both companies have continued to change and evolve as well.
And so what did the portfolio that you had at the beginning look like?
Yeah, it's interesting because we certainly had a set of assets, I guess, if you want to characterise, and were probably things BHP didn't want. And so we had a mixed bag of assets. So if you think about our commodity mix at the time, we would have had energy coal, metallurgical coal, manganese. So they were the bulks, if you like, and that was about 50% of the value of the organisation. The other 50% of the value was made up of things like nickel, also alumina, aluminium, lead, silver and zinc out of Cannington was about 50% of what we sort of had. And geographically, we were probably split about 45% of the value was in Australia, probably about 35% to 40% was in Southern Africa, and the balance was in the Americas. Interesting now, and we'll probably talk about that a bit later on, if you look at the company now, probably 75% of our value is made up of the base metals. When we actually do our next series of project execution around Taylor, Clark, etc. in the US, that'll push closer to 85% will be base metals. And the geographical split, probably in about 5 years, we'll find the majority of our value is actually in the Americas.
Okay.
So the portfolio has changed a lot in those 8 years.
And talk to me about the strategy that underpinned that, because I mean, with 2020 hindsight, it's clearly the way of the future to be looking at base metals, to be looking at the enormous demand for those sorts of base metals in the race to decarbonise. But I don't think that was as clear back in 2015.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, if you sit back to when we started to think about South32 in the first strategy session, the chairman at the time, Dave Crawford, and I were talking about the composition of the portfolio and where we wanted to take it. And we certainly had some belief on what assets belonged in South32 and what assets didn't belong in South32. But if you take a step back, what we did actually recognise is if you look at the world today, with a lot of the M&A and activity that occurred in the prior 2 decades, most of the mid-tier mining companies had disappeared. So part of the advantage, I guess, of a South32 was it's a mid-tier sized mining company, and for people like BHP, Rio, Anglo, it's very hard to add things of significant value. For a mid-tier company, you only need 1 or 2 great discoveries or 1 or 2 great acquisitions, and you can fundamentally change the nature of the group and create a lot of value for all your stakeholders. So David and I talked about what the right portfolio composition was, and while it wasn't necessarily as clear around the role of decarbonisation, and we'll come back to that in a second, it was very clear that some commodities had more attractive futures than others. So, for example, thermal coal, particularly what we owned in South Africa, was not a fit for us when we called that South Africa energy coal. And then we talked about, well, what are the commodities we think are going to be attractive? And we did talk about wanting to have copper. We did talk about expanding our zinc and nickel presence. And those commodities particularly have been far more attractive on a world of 1.5 degree or decarbonisation.
Okay, and so let's then talk about what you wanted to stop doing.
Yep.
Okay, so you've taken us to SAEC. What was the challenge of divesting there? So just spend a little bit more time telling us what the business is, the significance of the business in South Africa, and how you managed to divest yourself of that right in the middle of COVID, with all the attendant political issues and really human rights issues that attend to divesting of such a significant business in a developing country.
Yeah, and look, South African energy coal for us was a long journey. If we sort of break it into components, if we talk about the business first, it was a business that had a long history in South Africa under BHP and also Billiton's ownership. It was made up of 4 or 5 different mines. It was politically sensitive because of the need for power generation in the country. We probably sold about 50% of the products domestically to the existing power stations, and 50% of the product was exported. The sales, if you like, domestically were tied to long-term contracts, which are probably challenging for us. But the communities that we were involved in were large and had lots of challenges around that. So David and I spoke very early in the early days that South African energy coal wasn't a fit for us because it was also it was a commodity we didn't like. The fact that it sold domestically wasn't part of our strategy. And it was also, if you like, a business that required intense capital to continue to sort of sustain where it was going. So we started way back there, the planning about what we would do with South Africa energy coal. But because of the history we had in South Africa, we had to spend probably the first 2 or 3 years building relationships back with the government in South Africa, building relationships with the ANC, but also conscious under President Zuma's time, it probably wasn't the time for us to be actually selling energy coal because of some other issues around corruption, etc. So as soon as basically President Zuma was sort of replaced by Cyril Ramaphosa, we started, if you like, the process to actually actively sell South African energy coal. And it probably is also still a process that took 2 to 3 years' time. And the reason it took so long is the most important thing we wanted to do was to find the right counterparty. So when I say the right counterparty, we recognised that that business was critically important to the South African people around power generation, critically important to the communities that sort of relied on it, and it was the largest employer that we had in the group of about 10,000 people. So one of the things we wanted to find was someone who had similar values to ourselves, had enough, if you like, equity in the business that they could help sustain the business, but also someone who had a vision about what they could create in the business which lined up with what the South African government was looking for. So we ran, if you like, a competitive process to find the right counterparty, and that took a long time. We did find the right party. A gentleman called Mike Techie leads a company called Seriti. And Mike, if you like, has unquestionable values, good business person, loves South Africa, and we'd known him for a period of time. He actually used to work at South African Energy Coal many, many years ago. So we structured a deal, if you like, there that basically allowed him to set up the new business by supporting him financially, but also actually taking care of some of the historical closure liabilities. But the big sell between the two of us is actually talking to the government about why this was a good deal for South Africa. And the stakeholders we had to deal with was the ANC, the government, local communities, Eskom, the state-owned power, and it was an intensive process. And I'm not sure how many people in the room here have dealt with politicians in South Africa, but I learnt very early on, you have a meeting at 8:30, they don't see you at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
So you used to actually have to take some work to do to keep busy. The challenge we had is when COVID hit mid-transaction, you couldn't actually sit in a politician's office because none of them were in the office, and you can't sit there on Zoom waiting for them to connect. So it was actually a long process, but in the end, we believe we got to a really great outcome. We separated South African Energy Coal away from South32. We agreed to fund some of the historical closure liabilities. We did provide some working capital and finance support to Seriti at the start, but they paid that back within 12 months. I talk to Mike Techie on a regular basis. The business continues to grow and meet what South Africa needs in terms of thermal coal for their power grid. But Mike's also taking some of that money and he's actually investing in renewables now, particularly wind power, and talking to us about opportunities about providing some renewables potentially to Hillside. So for me, that's a good story about supporting these communities, supporting the government, but also a real just transition where they'll actually move, if you like, to renewables over time.
And are you on the phone to him?
Regular basis, probably about once every couple of months. Whenever I go to South Africa, I try and catch up for breakfast or lunch with him. We have a good relationship with him.
You added copper last year, and you were very open when we started to talk about that in preparing for today, that, folks in the business came to you and said, look, there's this opportunity, Sierra Gorda, and you just said, what the hell would I want to do that for?
Yeah, it's a good one because I think the reality is probably every single person in this room and every mining company in the world wants more copper. It's a fact of life. The world needs more copper in a major way.
So why did you react like that?
Well, I guess when how many people in the room have actually watched Shrek with their kids before? If you watch Shrek, there's actually a bit where the donkey is actually talking to Shrek and he talks that, Shrek, you're like an onion. You've got to take the layers off the onion off to understand, what you've actually got. When the business development team first bought, if you like, Sierra Gorda to me, I was probably like most other people in the market and thought, this is a real challenged asset because it's 50% owned or majority owned by a Polish state-owned government company. It is got a history of having a challenging ramp-up and there's very little information in the marketplace about it because they don't report a lot.
It's
so,
big, green and ugly.
Big, green and ugly is the way I would have described it. And I guess every challenge we gave to the business development team to take a piece of layer off that onion came back with more positive results.
Right.
So in the end, we managed to get convinced that it was the right thing to do. Then we had to convince Karen, Jowling and the rest of the board that it was the right transaction to actually do. We've had it for about a year now. We're really happy with the acquisition. The only thing we're unhappy is we'd like to own all of it.
Yeah.
We've been really surprised by the upside in the asset and the quality of the people. But it just goes to show you, I still think there's opportunities out there to create value for your shareholders as well.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to take a moment now to talk about, I mean, it's not a usual transition or maybe on paper CFO to CEO. I mean, a CFO, I come from a long line of chartered accountants, don't get me wrong. But, soft hands, pernickety, you're not necessarily somebody you would think of as the CEO of a mining company. But your accounting career really went off the tracks very early, didn't it?
I was probably the world's worst accountant, there's no doubt about that. Certainly come from a working class background. My dad, my uncles, my cousins, all family members actually worked down the wharf in Fremantle, so that's where the roots are all from. And I guess I sort of fell into accounting at the time. Joined BHP, first job was up at Port Hedland, which I loved. Probably the 2 jobs after that, I worked at a place called Cannington under a gentleman called Mark Adams. And I think Mark really opened my eyes to a bit of time working underground, a bit of time working in the process plant. And I guess from there I never looked back. I probably had the shortest duration ever as an accountant. I always remember when Marius Kloppers talked to me about the CFO job at BHP, I thought, I haven't really been an accountant before. Do I really want to do this? I've always had a love of the operations and probably spent 90% of my time in the operations.
And so you talk about that early operational experience in the operational side of the business, but there was also later experience at a place called Yellowknife in Canada, which is an extraordinary... First of all, tell us where it is.
Yeah, for the people who don't know a lot about Canada, Yellowknife is in the Northwest Territories, and the way I'd define it is if you think about where the tree line stops and finishes, that's pretty much...
Because it gets too cold for trees
to grow. So you probably get about 9 months of the year of darkness, snow. You get 3 months of the year of complete darkness and minus 45 degrees Celsius. And then you get a period of sunshine which starts about June where you think this is going to be fantastic. 2 weeks into that, the bugs come out and you can't wait for the winter to come back to kill all the mosquitoes. So it certainly is, if you like, a hardship posting. But one of the reasons I loved my time up there is I was lucky enough to be involved in the diamond business in that part of the world from when BHP first started building the project. So I actually went up there as part of independent peer review. I spent some time up there, if you like, working there for 3.5 years. And then one of my last roles before the CFO role in BHP, I was head of the business unit, Diamond and Specialty Products, who looked after Acadi and actually made the decision to sell it. The interesting piece, I guess, is having seen it over multiple decades, and we went back to the purpose of South32 that was introduced earlier. To me, that's a great example of what mining can do. You're operating in one of the world's most pristine environments. And they've done that over multiple decades, both BHP and Rio, and done an amazing job. But you actually saw people who, they had the common issues you see in Australia around traditional owners in terms of domestic abuse, alcohol abuse, not a lot of job opportunities. Probably 2.5 decades along the journey of Acadi and Dibec, which is a Rio operation, you actually saw generations of people coming back who actually were educated, working in the mines or setting up their own business or social workers, but you actually saw the wealth go back in, if you like, to the communities where the housing was better, the education was better, people had better access to things like cars, etc. So, when we think about the purpose of South32, I'm always very conscious that we mine other people's resources. If those people, the communities where we operate, don't get those benefits, we shouldn't be there.
Now, as a Queenslander, and I know a lot of folks in Queensland who are in the mining industry, it's addictive, right? Once you start doing it, all these people are in the room going, I'm not addicted. Oh, I could be an accountant, couldn't you? You could all be accountants. Not. I'm interested where the leadership part comes from, because I can see how you enjoyed that. You enjoyed being out in northwest Queensland. You enjoyed being in Yellowknife. Where did the call to leadership come from? Because you've talked about in the past your dad, Don, with that fierce work ethic, pulling himself up by the bootstraps out of the UK. But where did the leadership piece come from for you?
Yeah, I guess it's a good question. I mean, you talk about locations. I've been lucky enough to work with South32 and BHP, I think in 18 different locations, 6 different countries, ranging from the Northwest Territories of Canada to time in Angola, South Africa, UK, Vancouver, which isn't really a hardship posting, and probably most of the places around Australia. But I guess not only did I have the chance to get that different experiences, I managed to work with a lot of great leaders through my career. And, I've been lucky enough to have that experience of seeing how they operate and what they do around leading people. And I don't think there's probably a perfect leader in any situation, but I think it's picking up a little piece from everyone, but also, if you like, being a bit more authentic about who you are as a leader. And I think the one thing that BHP gave me from early days was opportunities to actually make a difference and make a change. Maybe in the early days, Karen would probably say I might have been a little bit too bold and a little bit too aggressive on some change things, but they always gave me the opportunity to grow. And like I said, had some really great leaders in terms of Marius Kloppers and Andrew McKenzie who really helped me along the journey. And I guess sort of got to see what really good leaders look like.
So talk about then mining's role in decarbonisation and how you're meeting emissions targets. So, you've got some really high emitting operations and some serious just transition considerations. And I think maybe the way to start that part of the conversation is to think about the operation at Hillside in South Africa. Tell us what the operation is and what the challenge is for South32 in dealing with that organisation, that operation.
Yeah, maybe if we take one step back, Alan, on that, what I would start by saying, and particularly for the potential graduates we have in the room and younger people who want to join the industry, whether it's zinc, copper, silver, aluminium, manganese, these are the commodities that are going to help the world decarbonise. So the challenge for the industry is how do we continue to meet that demand, which I think is exponentially going to grow, but how do we meet that demand in a way that has the smallest possible footprint? And that's from a climate change perspective, but also biodiversity, etc. We do have some challenges in terms of South32. If you think about Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions, Scope 3, probably less of an issue for us, but something we're working on. Scope 1 and Scope 2...
And they're the ones you own as a result of your
Correct.
operations?
So Scope 1, if you like, are the emissions that we actually generate as part of our operation. Scope 2 are the things that we import, for example, power that we might use in our facilities.
Which you have some, but not entire control over. I mean, you're plugged into the grid. We'll talk about what you can do in a greenfield operation in a moment, but to some extent, you're in a three-legged race with whoever the government is and whatever however it is that they generate electricity, dirty or clean.
So one of the opportunities of South32 for us, it's not about large capital outlays, but there is a challenge around working with governments about how you do the transition. So if you take Hillside, for the people who don't know, Hillside is an aluminium smelter that sits in Richards Bay in South Africa. It is the largest aluminium smelter in the Southern Hemisphere. Been running for a long period of time and has pretty much always been hitting its maximum technical capacity and slowly creeping. So a really well-run organisation. The challenge is for us, it accounts for 62% of our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, of which the biggest component, to your point, comes from the Eskom power grid, which is predominantly at the moment thermal coal. That's where all our emissions profile come from.
And that presents presumably a risk of the organisation, the entity becoming internationally uncompetitive over time if you can't secure that affordable source of low carbon energy to run that operation.
Correct. So we have 3 aluminium smelters. 2 are actually green, so one in Mozambique, which is off hydro, and then we have one we're restarting called Alumar in Brazil, which is a combination of wind and hydro. And what we're already seeing in that industry is a shift towards more green aluminium, more demand for green aluminium. So over time, if we can't find a way to actually green Hillside, I think it does put its economic future in jeopardy.
And with it, 29,000 jobs.
Yeah, well, there's probably 30,000 people that depend on it. We also sell probably about 30% of our products domestically, which goes to a company called Hulamin. They make auto parts that go into Europe. What are they looking for? Green aluminium. So the knock-on impact is actually much larger than 30,000. And from our perspective, what we're trying to work with there is Eskom, the local communities, the government, about how do we actually bring renewables into Hillside. What we've actually publicly said is that we've got a current power block that finishes in 2031. We want to find a way to make that next power block green. And that's right on the government's, if you like, agenda, because they're very conscious about how many people we employ. They're very conscious about they're trying to diversify their economy. They're very conscious that a lot of the product we produce then goes into Europe as well, and that market will close if we don't find a way to actually green. So it is a piece, if you like, constant engagement with various stakeholders in South Africa. Lots of discussions with our management team and with the board. We do think there's a way through there that's a win-win to actually find a way to green it. But it's an example of it's just not about throwing capital at things, it's about working with all the stakeholders to get to a common aim. We've got a similar kind of challenge, for example, at our Worsley Alumina refinery in the southwest of WA. That's our next biggest emitter. We have, if you like, 6 coal-fired boilers that basically provide the steam for the facility. We get coal from 2 local suppliers. Those 2 local suppliers also supply the state government of WA to their power station that essentially fuels, if you like, the power grid in the southwest of Western Australia and the Perth metropolitan area.
So,
now,
so the fate of Worsley is tied up with the fate of secure, reliable, affordable power in Western Australia?
Yeah, look, the reality is we can convert from coal to gas. We've got 5 of them. It's about $10 million US to convert each one. It's not a high capital cost, but if we go too fast, then the government probably doesn't get the coal supply it needs to keep the power on, and you have 500 jobs in the town of Collie that evaporate. So we're working closely with the WA government there on what a just transition looks like as we both move away from coal to gas, and then ultimately a better future.
So it's really interesting because then you've got all these competing things, presumably at the board level as well, of, what is your social licence to operate? What are your, which might be different to the sort of environmental and aspirations that you might have to decarbonise as a business, to future-proof the business, and how that might actually present in the short term, even the medium term, a conflict with your social licence to operate in a community.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive. I think they are tied. We spoke about Hillside, we spoke about Worsley. There's a balance there of the employees, the communities, the governments and the external stakeholders. I don't think anyone's missed a line, for example, on the need for decarbonisation.
No.
It's just about how you develop a realistic plan to actually get there, but also recognise it's not going to happen overnight if it's going to be a meaningful, sustainable change. But it's not just the existing operations. One of the things we're looking at the moment is building 2 new projects in Arizona in the US. And we think about, places like Mozambique where we operate, Colombia, Brazil, South Africa, where you've probably got more developing countries that have more opportunities. Well, the reality in Arizona, we're building a project in a county called Santa Cruz County. It's probably one of the poorest counties in the US, probably the poorest in Arizona. We have the ability there, for example, to lift the actual revenue generation of the Santa Cruz County probably tenfold, which will go into education.
Now, I love everything about this Hermosa project. I'm so excited. And every time I get really excited about it, Graham has to calm me down because he's trying to contain expectations. But it is so exciting as an opportunity. You've just touched on the fact that it's kind of mind-blowing that it represents an opportunity to haul Americans out of poverty. 25% of that Santa Cruz County is living below the poverty line. But more broadly, what are the deposits and what does that opportunity represent not only for South32 but for the United States that is suddenly saying, right, we're going to chuck not billions but trillions at this energy transition, and a desire to have onshore rather than relying on overseas, and particularly anything manufactured from China, well, not anything, but to have more sovereign reliability on not only the deposits but the development of them?
Yeah, it's actually a good question and a good challenge. If you sort of think about it in the more broader context, I think the first question is, when you're a resource company, what should you be looking for? And I guess what I would sort of encourage people at the moment is to look for the minerals that are going to be critical for that decarbonisation journey. But I think the other thing, if history has told you in the resource industry the real world-class assets tend to be the ones that have multiple options over multiple decades. And some of it's also thinking about what does that future look like, because having worked at BHP, I know very early on things like Escondida, which is a large copper mine and probably the best one in the world in Chile, was challenged from an NPV perspective. And I think probably the Pilbara for both Rio and BHP would have been in the early days, but the businesses are growing exponentially over time. And I think what you've got to sort of position yourself is to own a deposit that has multiple decades of optionality. You can ride out different price waves, and you can also ride out government policy changes. So if you think about Hermosa, we bought that probably very early on, if you like, in the development of South32. What sort of attracted us at the time was three broad pieces of value. One was, if you like, the Taylor deposit, which is most advanced. It's a lead, silver, zinc operation, very similar to what we do in North Queensland. We've been running for 25 years at Cannington. The next one was the potential of a manganese deposit called Clark, and then this very large, if you like, land package. Where we are today is, Taylor is currently in the feasibility stage study. We believe we can produce an operation or a business there that'll be on the lowest, if you like, quartile on the cost curve because of byproduct credits. At the moment, it's got 20 plus years worth of resource, but it's open laterally at depth and sideways, and I think that'll continue to basically grow. And I think it produces, zinc and silver, which are going to be critical minerals as part of the decarbonisation. Clark itself is a manganese oxide deposit, which is going to benefit from some of the government policy changes you spoke about. The Biden administration has put in place what's called the Inflation Reduction Act, and what it really is looking to do is build out, if you like, in the US, the US-friendly countries, a supply chain of critical minerals that it can use to actually grow its EV market. Good thing for us is manganese looks like it's probably going to be one of the important battery components as the battery chemistry changes. Today in the NCM 622 battery, it's about 16%. As we look forward on the new battery technologies, it's probably closer to 60%. But what's important, and this is, I guess, a lesson as we think about Australia, South Africa and other contexts, some of the real changes in the US has been the changes, if you like, in policies to actually really encourage the development of those resources which they define as critical. There's 4 critical minerals in the US. We have 2 of them. And as a consequence, there's the potential to tap funding from the government to actually help build the project, but also to help accelerate approval processes. Now, that's early in the pieces today, but there's a lot of excitement around what that can do for us.
And so if you look at it from the point of view of Washington, there's no manganese metal production in North America. I think manganese, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, and another entity, what is it that the Defence Department has said, righto, we absolutely say that that's critical. It's critical for national defence, not only in a military sense, but in terms of, again, the sovereign reliability of being able to get your hands on those absolutely critical minerals.
So the only battery grade, if you like, manganese that gets produced today is out of China.
Right.
Doesn't mean other countries can't do it, but they're the only country that does it today. So certainly the US government's pushing towards domestic supply and security. And the view is it is going to make an important change, if you like, in how batteries are developed. And as a consequence, it'll probably, to some degree, replace cobalt and actually allow people to be a little bit more, if you like, using less nickel in the batteries. We are the only manganese oxide deposit, if you like, in the US. You can convert other manganese deposits. We have GEMCO in Australia and we have South African manganese in South Africa. You can convert that, if you like, to battery-grade manganese. They have some impurities, but the other challenge is distance. We're right in the backyard. And as the US starts to build out these mega battery factories, they're looking to do it in that corridor of the US where we're well positioned to take advantage of that. Now, to put that in concept, in sort of, if you put that in where are we sitting in that journey, we are at a pre-feasibility stage on this, so there's still a long way to go.
And do you want to give me a hint about the Taylor deposit? How's that shaping up? Because
So Taylor's, that's more, if you like, we're getting close by the end of this year to an investment decision in that space.
And what's that looking like?
That to me looks exciting. I mean, again, we've done Cannington for 25 plus years, same mining methods, same processing methods, same customers. The interesting thing, I guess, for us is it's going to be, even though it's in the US, probably 80% of our workforce is going to speak Spanish. So that's another adjustment we'll have to make.
And would you expect that the US government would actually actively support the development of the mine? Because as you say, you've got this defence prioritisation, you've got the tragically named IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which is really an effort to do the exact things that align with the purpose of your business, which is get that sovereign, reliable supply of the minerals that you need to deal with the transition. 2, reduce reliance on China. And 3, offer some hope to the working classes in the United States because of the febrile political Trumpian kind of appeal that's tearing the country apart if those people aren't brought along on that journey. And Hermosa promises to do all 3 of those things, to align with them. So would they throw their money where their mouth is?
Look, I think time will tell on that. There are certainly 3 levers available for the US government to help us accelerate the projects. One is they have a process called Fast 41. There isn't a mining project in that yet, but if we were the first project to go into that process, it allows you to actually accelerate all the approval processes. And we're a good candidate for that because we're an underground mine, so very low surface disturbance. We don't have any endangered species, we don't have any traditional owner issues, and like I said earlier, we're building this in one of the poorest counties in the US, which is looking for opportunities for a workforce. The other, I guess, 2 levers that are available is the Department of Defence actually has available a pool of money to help accelerate development of critical minerals, and that's very much focused on the exploration development phase. And then the Department of Energy actually has a pool of money allocated by Congress to actually help build things. So in that case...
There's a lot of money sloshing around with
There
this.
is, but there's a process to go through and to qualify for that, and that's something we'll have a look at. We haven't got that yet, but there's certainly 3 levers, I guess, that exist for us to actually invest, if you like, in that part of the world.
And are the investment decisions dependent on US government backing to any extent?
No, so the investment decisions will stand by themselves. Any assistance we get will basically be an add-on and a benefit, and that's something we'll work through over time as we make progress. But, you know, it is an interesting contrast. If you think about mining and where you invest, you've got South America, North America, you've got Africa, you've got Australia. Mining companies have choices about where they put their money. And certainly when you think about our investment criteria, if you take, for example, you know, Taylor, we're talking about roughly 1.7 billion US. We believe ultimately have a mine life beyond 30 years. You know, what you're looking for is a sense of stability around fiscal arrangements, but also around legislation, such as environment, climate, and also people that actually allow you to make that large investment up front to actually get the benefit over time. So, you know, as we think about where we invest our dollars, at the moment, the US is probably the most attractive location.
Yeah. And to be part of the revival of the industrial heart of the United States is part of what all of that promises. Now, we did promise that we would come to your questions, and Sally's going to help us coordinate that. I have millions more, but I'll be very quiet and let you ask yours.
Thank you, Alan. So if you'd like to ask a question, we've got 2 committee members out in the audience, Richard Shoddy and Sam Street. When you ask a question, please just state your name and your affiliation. Thank you. We have one over here.
I'm Peter Reeve, Arcane Greenstone Gold. Graham, you're in a sort of unusual position with a suite of commodities. By any measure, I think we're losing the public debate about whether mining is a good thing. And it's becoming a threat to projects more and more. With your broad suite of commodities, how do you think we can fix it? And why don't you run it when you finish the South32?
Look, I guess from my perspective, and we've got Andrew sitting at the front here, who's now the chair of the Minerals Council of Australia. I think the Minerals Council of Australia, the similar venue, if you like, in Southern Africa, and also the US, and also the ICMM, which is the international piece of that, really has an opportunity to remind people about whether it's your iPhone, whether it's your car, whether it's what you're wearing, mining plays an important part in providing those pieces, if you like. But I also, back to the earlier point, if you think about the use of copper, zinc, nickel, you know, aluminium, they are going to be the commodities that allow us to, you know, not use plastics anymore in the aluminium space and packaging. allow us to build wind turbines, allow us to actually put in solar facilities that are actually going to help decarbonise the world. So I think, every company and every industry association has to do a better job about it, reminding people about the advantages that we actually have about decarbonising the world. But I also think individual companies in the industries, it's not about actually telling the same story over again, because we all have great stories about community impacts. It's about how we sort of get more people who don't like mining having more of a challenging discussion about, well, why do you not like mining? What do you think we need to do differently? What are the discussion points we need to have? I just think it's a lot more around dialogue and conversation that we need to push much harder.
And how does that challenge look? Sometimes you see those maps and you see where, particularly, thermal coal is, where met coal is in Queensland, and then you look at the potential deposits, right, of all these minerals, these critical minerals we need for the future. And, people will say to you, see, it's really quite simple. Those workforces can just be retooled up and we'll just dig there in happy days. Those communities understand that. It's a cartoonish view that the transition will be that simple and that you can develop a mine by clicking your fingers. But isn't that something that's getting through to people as we start talking about what a just transition looks like and what the future of those communities is?
Yeah, I think it's always a much easier discussion with the local communities because they really feel the benefits around employment, around procurement spend. So they actually see the benefits pretty quickly. And I'd like to think most communities would see the mining companies that they're hosting as good stewards of the environment. So I think, I get less worried about the local communities. I think it's more about people understanding where do the end products actually go and what role do the end products actually have. Mm. And, again, that comes back to your iPhone, your car, your metal straw that you use, your metal can. They're all the things that the world actually does need. And the other thing we shouldn't forget when you talk about places like China, India, mining's played an important part in actually lifting people out of poverty and will for the next couple of decades, as well as the decarbonisation piece.
Mm. I've got another question over with Richard.
Graham, Michael Beer, K2O Potash, and a very proud chartered accountant like you two. So congratulations. That was 40 years ago, of course, when I was at Pricewaterhouse. That's a little while ago now. I want to talk to you about exploration. I know the Ausquest people, they're clever people. You've got an alliance with them for the last 5 or 6 years, and I think it continues till the end of this year. Exploration is obviously very important for medium, large companies like yours to grow. Can you just talk about exploration, not specifically necessarily about Ausquest and what they're doing for you, but just about how important exploration is in terms of your company?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I would start by saying Ausquest has been a fantastic partner and continues to be today. Really enjoyed working with them. We have a number of those strategic alliances. We have another couple across the globe. We also do exploration in our own name. I guess when we started as a company in terms of South32, one of the real benefits we got was we got a lot of the information that BHP had collected over many years of exploration. Because they weren't doing a lot of exploration at the time, we managed to actually attract, for a company our size, some of the best people in the world in exploration. Today we have about 25 projects running globally, predominantly chasing base metals, ranging from Europe where we're exploring, South America, North America, Australia and parts of Africa. We just recently announced the other week Cheetah Valley, which is a large copper exploration project, if you like, in Argentina. We plan to move into operating that over the next 12 months, and we see huge potential to actually grow out that exploration project, if you like, in that part of the world. I do think over the last probably 2 to 3 decades, mining companies haven't done enough exploration, which is why you're going to see these massive, if you like, gaps in things like copper and zinc, where supply will not be able to meet demand. And I think, you're going to see now everyone's back into the exploration space. Probably the best example I can use is when we demerged, there's the annual Prospectors Developers, the PDAC conference in Canada. The first year we went, we were probably the only company of any significant size. This year and last year when we're there, there's companies everywhere. So everyone is charging back into exploration because they see the need. But the reality is to find a world-class deposit takes a lot of work. If you even find one, you used to say it was 7 to 10 years to develop it. Now it's probably closer to 10 to 15 years. The reality is I think that's just going to bring a lot more attention to pricing, and some of the scarcity pricing you see in commodity prices in lithium, I think you'll end up seeing for periods of time in things like copper and zinc and silver, because it's just so hard to get a hold of.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question.
Hedley Widdop from Lion Selection Group and also from the Volunteer Steering Committee of the Melbourne Miners Club. Thank you both for an excellent dialogue, and Graham for your insightful comments. You talked about exploration just momentarily there, and it strikes me that leading the charge on decarbonisation involves a great deal of new metal coming to market, some of which is currently known about but might be on the margins of economic, some of which is unknown about. And I ask this question because I'm sitting on a table of students who are all very excited about the future, and they're asking questions about the future in the industry. You might be a better person to answer that question than me, so I invite you to come over and say hello at the end. But there's a need for innovation. You're the size of company that can take part, possibly even lead that, to bring some of these deposits to the market. Could you just explore briefly the areas of innovation, perhaps alongside energy generation or deployment, that you see as being important in your business and the industry generally?
And maybe in answering that, Graham, the fact that for young people who, I mean, clearly you've had a burning sense of purpose in what you do, but certainly with younger people coming through the workplaces, they've got to have a purpose, they've got to understand the purpose, and the fact that Hermosa is a next generation mine, right? A carbon neutral mine. Talk about that as well in that sense of innovation.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, we sort of, if you like, have a group of people in our organisation that works on what's called South32, and that really is about working out where do we want to spend time and money on innovation. And there are a couple of key themes that we work on in that. One is around exploration, looking at new technologies and new ways to find things, because we do think the world's going to need more of these commodities, and innovative ways of finding it is going to be important. We also have a piece which is around next generation mine, and that's, for example, for Taylor at Hermosa, we're doing work on, how do we electrify everything underground. We're doing work on ore sensors, so you don't have to take the material up to sort of crush it. And then the other big piece that we spend a lot of time on is probably two components. For the existing operations, it's data analytics. And the reality is today there is so much information and sensors out there that when you're running a processing facility or even underground, you have a lot more information than you ever had in your life. How do you make the most value of that information? And probably the last piece from our side in terms of South32 is working in that decarbonisation space around energy generation and what that looks like in the future. But, to the students out there, and I'll absolutely go have a conversation after, I think there are so many opportunities to sort of grow the industry, and the industry will move in different directions over the next couple of decades. There's probably never been a better time to be in the industry, but more importantly, probably never been a better time that you can actually make a difference through working in mining.
Absolutely, well said. A good note on which to end. Thanks very much, Sally.
I think that's all the questions we've got time for, Ellen. So I think we'd like to say thank you to Graham and Ellen, and to do that I'd like to invite Mike Gorda, White & Case partner, to the stage to do that.
Thank you. Now, before I go into my vote of thanks, I'd like to give Ellen a very big round of applause and a little gift.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks very much, Mike. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Next, my vote of thanks. Graham, thank you very much for giving us an insight into the complexities of the issues that face the mining industry today. What struck me first about the discussion that you had with Ellen was, and particularly from the story about your assets in South Africa, was your ability to get the job done, but to do it in a way that didn't compromise on your values and South32's values, and the responsibility that you have for the community. Another thing that struck me about the chat was about your optimism about the role that mining can play in improving the lives of individuals and in the surrounding communities. I think this is critical and important in order to attract young people into the industry. Finally, with decarbonisation being so central to Australia, but to the world, we will no doubt be looking to leaders such as yourself, people who don't see the issues as black or white, binary, people who have a deep understanding of the complexity of the issues and who are able to take a long-term and measured approach to resolving those issues. Graham, thank you very much for attending the Melbourne Mining Club lunch today, and Ellen, thank you again.
Thank you.
And I would like to add that this is a new format, but the reason why we are giving Graham a bottle instead of a geopick today is because Graham already has two. So don't worry.
Thank you very much. Thank you.